You've heard of Samson from the Bible. You've heard of Hercules from Greek mythology. Two of the most legendary strongmen in all of history. We all know their stories are kind of similar, but what if one actually inspired the other? That's the fascinating question we're diving into today. So here's the big question we're tackling. Could the Bible's strongest man, Samson, have actually been the blueprint for Greece's greatest hero, Hercules? I know, it might sound a little out there at first, but the evidence is surprisingly compelling. All right, so first up, let's properly meet our two contenders. They come from totally different worlds, different cultures, but as you're about to see, they share a whole lot more than just incredible strength. So on one hand, you have Samson. He's an Israelite judge from the Hebrew Bible, a man who is given superhuman strength by God. And on the other hand, you've got Hercules, the ultimate Greek hero, a demigod famous across the ancient world for his just unbelievable power. They're basically the titans of their own cultures. But this is where it gets really interesting. When you put their stories right next to each other, the parallels start to pop up. And we're not talking about vague similarities. These are specific details that are just, well, they're too much to be a coincidence. And what's really wild is where both of their legends officially kick off. It's not in some epic battle against an army or a crazy monster. It's with a lion. And the details here are absolutely crucial. It's not just that they both fought a lion. For both Samson and Hercules, this was their very first big feat of strength. And get this, they both did it with nothing but their bare hands. But believe me, the lion is just the beginning. This pattern of shared story beats just keeps going, right through their most famous acts of strength. I mean, look at how they deal with cities. Samson famously rips the gates of Gaza clean off their hinges and carries them away. Hercules, he tears down the walls of Mycenae. When they're thirsty, they both miraculously get water. And tragically, both stories involve the death of their first wife. Not something they did on purpose, but something that happened as a result of the violent worlds they lived in. And it doesn't stop with their feats of strength. Even their tragic endings, the moments they are most vulnerable, follow the same playbook. Their ultimate downfall doesn't come from a rival's strong man or an enemy army. It comes from a woman they love. For Samson, it's Delilah who tricks him, which leads to him losing his strength and getting captured. For Hercules, it's his final lover, Deianira, whose actions cause his agonizing death. In the end, both heroes choose to take their own lives. And get this, even their names, Delilah and Deianira, sound suspiciously similar, right? It's just an incredible string of so-called coincidences. Okay, so the stories are really, really similar. I think we can all agree on that. But that's only half the puzzle. The big question is, how could a story from ancient Israel have possibly made its way all the way over to Greece? Well, the answer is actually simpler than you might think. You see, the ancient world wasn't a bunch of isolated bubbles. These places were connected by bustling sea trade routes. And you had peoples like the Phoenicians, master sailors, who were basically cultural messengers. They didn't just carry goods, they carried ideas, news, and, you guessed it, stories. So, we have the striking parallels. That's our motive. And we have a plausible way for the story to travel. That's our opportunity. But now we need the smoking gun, the most critical piece of evidence in any investigation, the timeline. Which story actually came first? And when you look at the dates, it's not even close. The gap between when these two stories first show up is huge. We're talking more than 400 years. That is an enormous head start for a story to travel and evolve. We've got archaeological finds, like a little stone seal found right where Samson was said to have lived that depicts a man fighting a lion. This stuff points to his story being told as far back as the 12th or 11th centuries BCE, but the first literary mentions of Hercules, they don't pop up in Greece until the 8th century BCE. That's a gap of centuries.
Okay, let's put all the pieces together on the table. We have the wild parallels, a clear path for the story to travel, and a timeline that fits perfectly. So, what's the final verdict here?
The evidence really does seem to point strongly in one direction. The parallels are just too specific to brush off as coincidence. There were obvious trade routes for the story to travel. And, maybe most importantly, the story of Samson is clearly, demonstrably, the older of the two. Now, does this mean Hercules is just a carbon copy of Samson? No, probably not. The most likely conclusion is something a bit more nuanced. The powerful legend of this Israelite strongman was probably one of several stories that got carried by sailors to Greece. And once there, it was adapted, it was changed, and it was woven into the much larger, more complicated tapestry that became the Hercules myth. It's a perfect example of how ancient cultures would borrow and remix stories to fit their own world. And that leaves us with one last thought. If even these foundational heroes from completely different cultures seem to share a hidden history, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other stories that we think of as completely original are actually just echoes of something much, much older?